The moment didn't begin with an insult, it began with a view so perfect it almost felt unreal. The crystal chandelier is inside the peak trembled softly as the elevator doors opened on the 80th floor, revealing Tokyo stretched out beneath us. From that height, the city didn't look alive. It looked engineered like glowing circuits on a massive board, each light carefully placed. Each movement controlled. And tonight, that perfection was mine. This wasn't just another event. It was the $90,000 legacy gala I had spent 6 relentless months designing, planning, and executing down to the smallest detail. Every guest, every seat, every corset, all existed because I made it happen. It was meant to celebrate the Caldwell family's power, their image, their so-called legacy. As I walked toward the head table, where the most influential guests in Tokyo were already settling into their velvet chairs, I slowed. Something was off. I counted once, then again. 12 chairs. There were only 12 chairs, and I was the 13th guest. For a brief second, I thought it was a mistake, a simple oversight. But then I looked up. Justin was already seated, relaxed, holding a glass of champagne like nothing was wrong. His arm rested casually along the back of the chair beside him where Madison sat. Very pregnant, very visible, very intentional. He didn't stand. He didn't apologize. Instead, he laughed, a short, sharp, practiced laugh that cut cleanly through the soft music in the room. Oops, he said lightly, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. Guess we miscounted. A few people chuckled politely. I suppose we're a bit short on space at the adults' table tonight, he added, tilting his glass slightly. Don't worry, Taylor. I'm sure there's a stool in the kitchen where the help eats. The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy, deliberate, final. Patricia, my mother-in-law, didn't even look at me. She simply adjusted her diamond necklace, her expression calm, satisfied. Then she gave a small, dismissive gesture toward the exit like she was directing staff. Like I was staff. I waited for something to break inside me. Anger, hurt, humiliation. But none of it came. Instead, something else took its place. A cold, precise clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a seat at a table that had been built with my own money. Seems I'm not family, I said, my voice steady, controlled. So I shouldn't be responsible for family celebrations. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I turned and walked away. Have you ever stood in a room full of people and realized you don't exist to them? If you have, then you already understand this moment. The elevator ride down felt different from the ride up. The soft hum as it descended from the 80th floor sounded less like machinery and more like a reset. A quiet restart of something that had been running wrong for far too long. I watched the numbers drop, one by one. And instead of seeing Tokyo, I saw numbers of a different kind. Ledgers, accounts, years. 5 years, to be exact. 5 years of balancing a system that was never balanced to begin with. Justin and Patricia didn't see me as a partner. They saw me as a function, a tool, someone reliable enough to fix things, invisible enough to never question. They never looked closely enough to see what I actually was. The strategist. The one holding everything together. I had invested in their version of family quietly, carefully, believing that if I made myself essential enough, I would eventually belong. But that belief was a mistake. When I first entered the Caldwell circle, I wasn't small. I was the one people called when deals were failing, the one who could take a collapsing acquisition and turn it into profit. I built my own firm from nothing. I earned every inch of my success. But in their world, my ability became something else. Convenient. Useful. Exploitable. I stayed silent as Justin's tech empire began to fall apart. I watched as bad investments drained his resources. I noticed when money quietly disappeared from our joint accounts to fund projects that existed only to protect his ego and still lie. Didn't confront him. I acted. I Covered. I fixed. I personally paid $900,000 in property taxes to keep their estate from being auctioned off. I stabilized their finances. I protected their image. I rebuilt what they kept breaking. And I told myself it meant something. I told myself that loyalty would earn me a place. But standing in that elevator, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't a partner. I was a safety net, a silent one. I had built a cage out of patience, convincing myself it was strategy. I called my silence strength. I called my independence power. But it wasn't. It was erosion. They called me self-sufficient as a compliment. But really, it was an excuse, a way to justify never showing up for me. While Justin rebuilt his connection with Madison, I rebuilt their offshore structures to keep regulators away. While they planned appearances, I handled reality. My compassion had become something they overused, something they expected, something they never intended to repay. That's when it clicked. This marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a subscription. And I was the one paying for everything. They didn't miscount the chairs tonight. They made a decision. The architect was no longer needed once the building was finished. But they forgot one simple rule. If you remove the foundation, everything collapses. By the time I stepped out into the neon-lit streets of Shinjuku, the air felt different, cooler, sharper, clearer. I didn't feel shaken. I felt focused. I walked through the crowd until I found a quiet, high-end lounge tucked away from the noise. Inside, it smelled like cedar and stillness. No distractions. No noise. Just space to think. I sat down, opened my laptop, and got to work. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an audit. I had 30 minutes before the first course upstairs ended. Before the staff began processing the next round of payments, I started with the venue. The $90,000 deposit. It wasn't under Justin's name. It was under mine. 3 clicks. Payment reversed. Reason: breach of agreement. Next, I moved to the rest of their legacy week. Private tour canceled. Yacht charter revoked. Every guarantee I had signed gone. Then I reached the real leverage. The legacy fund. Justin had spent the night bragging about a $900,000 endowment. What he didn't mention was that it wasn't his. It existed because of me. It was never a gift. It was a loan. And I had never intended it to be permanent. I authorized liquidation. Every asset, every dollar transferred back to me. The screen glowed quietly in front of me. Numbers shifting, accounts closing, control returning. For 5 years, I had been the silent architect of their survival. But tonight, I pulled the plug. My phone started vibrating almost immediately. Justin. Again. And again. Then Patricia. There's a problem with the card. Fix this now. You're embarrassing us. I didn't respond. I didn't even pick up the phone. I just closed my laptop and ordered another espresso. They wanted a world where I didn't have a seat at the table. They were about to learn something important. If I leave the table doesn't stay. The lounge remained quiet, but my phone told a different story. Messages flooded. In anger, blame, accusations. You've lost your mind. You're acting like a child. We gave you everything. Their words weren't loud anymore. They were empty because they weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I stopped accepting it. I read every message without reacting. Then I opened a new email. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was structural. I contacted my former mentor, corporate attorney known for precision and results. I didn't ask for advice. I gave instructions. The $900,000 fund is a loan, I told him, and I'm calling it in. Simple. Clear. Final. For 5 years, I had been the one to bend, to fix, to stay quiet. But that ended tonight. The Caldwells built their world on appearances. But appearances don't hold when the foundation walks away. A week after I left that table in Tokyo, The clinical reality of the Caldwells' desperation was laid bare in a sterile conference room. I had initiated a full legal audit of the empire's dwindling assets, and the findings were more devastating than I had imagined. My attorney leaned forward, sliding a folder across the mahogany table with an expression that was part pity, part professional triumph. They didn't just spend the money, Taylor, he said quietly. They stole it. Inside the folder were withdrawal slips from my private business account, totaling $120,000. The signature at the bottom looked exactly like mine. The same fluid loops and sharp exits, but a forensic expert had already flagged it as a forgery. Justin and Patricia had spent years playing the role of the refined elite. But when the bank accounts ran dry, they had resorted to simple, clumsy theft. The money hadn't gone toward corporate restructuring or debt relief. It had gone toward Madison's luxury maternity suite, a new private membership for Justin, and a vintage jewelry piece for Patricia. They had been funding their legacy with the proceeds of my sweat, while treating me like a distraction from their sophisticated lives. I sat in the silence, realizing that their power had never been real. It was a borrowed status, a performance lease with stolen currency. Patricia had spent her life obsessing over lineage and commonness, yet she was the one who had committed the most common of crimes. They had confused having wealth with being worthy, and now that the money was gone, they had no inner character to stand on. This was the final strike. It removed every remaining path to redemption or reconciliation. They weren't just an ungrateful family. They were criminals masquerading as aristocracy. The old money facade had finally crumbled, revealing the empty, bankrupt reality beneath. The Tokyo rainy season had finally arrived, a relentless gray curtain that matched the heavy finality of the week. I was sitting in my new apartment, a space half the size of the Caldwell brownstone, but paid for entirely with my own clean revenue. When the intercom buzzed through the grainy security monitor, I saw him. Justin stood on the sidewalk, his expensive Italian suit soaked through. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his own lies had finally broken his spine. He looked haggarded, the polished veneer of a tech CEO replaced by the raw desperation of a man who had lost his anchor. I opened the door, but left the security chain engaged, a metal barrier between my new life and his old deceits. "Taylor, please," he whispered, his voice cracking as the neon lights of Ginza reflected in the puddles at his feet. "The legal audit, the forgery charges. You have to drop them. Mother is having a breakdown, and the authorities are breathing down our necks. We're losing the Ginza offices. Everything we built is going under." I looked at the man who had laughed while I stood seatless in front of Tokyo's elite. I thought about the signature he had forged to pay for his mistress's comfort. Well, he planned to discard me. "What you built was a performance, Justin," I said, my voice as cold and rhythmic as the rain. "I was the only thing real in your entire empire." He reached out a hand, pressing it against the door frame. "We're family, Taylor. You can't do this to us." "You made your choice the night you miscounted the chairs," I replied. I reached for the folder sitting on my entryway table and slid a document through the gap in the door. The final eviction notice for their prestigious Ginza headquarters, signed by the real owner of the commercial lease. "I didn't destroy your legacy, Justin. I just stopped funding it. Please," he begged, his eyes red and searching. "Help us one last time." I leaned in close to the gap, meeting his gaze with a terrifying clarity. "Seems I'm not family," I whispered, echoing the words he had used to humiliate me. "So, I'm not responsible for your survival." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The sound of the lock engaging was the most satisfying thing I had heard in 5 years. I didn't wait to hear him leave. I walked to my kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and watched the rain wash the city clean. 6 months later, the relentless gray of Tokyo was a distant memory. As I stood on a terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast, watching the sun dip into the Mediterranean, the air didn't smell of corporate anxiety anymore. It smelled of salt and a future I had designed for myself. My new firm, Her eyes on sustainable development was thriving. But the real success wasn't in the profit margins. It was in the freedom to never let myself be hidden again. The Caldwell empire had been systematically dismantled. The Ginza offices were sold to a rival, and the family name was no longer a golden ticket, but a warning label. Justin had received a suspended sentence for his involvement in the financial fraud, and Patricia was living in a modest apartment, far from the social circles she once used to diminish me. They had built their lives on a foundation of conditional love, and when they withdrew their loyalty, they found they had nothing left to stand on. I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't breaking them. It was becoming the person they said I could never be without their permission. I had turned their rejection into a message for others. I now spend my weekends mentoring young women in finance, teaching them how to build their own tables so they never have to beg for a chair. If you've ever felt like the extra person in the room, or the one whose contributions are treated as footnotes, this is my letter to you. You are not defined by the seat you are given. You are defined by the world you create when you decide to walk away. Don't wait for them to notice you. Make your own noise. The greatest revenge is living well with a clear conscience and a horizon that is entirely your own. If Taylor's journey from the invisible help to the architect of her own life inspired you, please share this video with one friend who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and quiet retribution.